Lord has presented us with this evening. Let me thank all of the ministries who have made this possible. The Dorcas Women's Ministry, Health and Wellness, Media, as well as administration in the person of uh, Sister Eunice Wilson. Thank you so much for this, organizing this. Grateful that we had this opportunity. We've done some things and been blessed to have opportunities to be a part of what God is doing in terms of our physical health. We consistently have those opportunities with our spiritual health in terms of our classes, Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon worship experiences, Bible study, as well as others. And tonight, we get the opportunity to also experience something that God cares deeply about, and that is our mental health. And as we've discussed in other settings, we know that mental health has been around and needed to be addressed since humanity has existed, but it has come to the forefront a little bit more since March of last year when the global pandemic hit and we were forced to redefine the word normal. And so I want to share a word of prayer, and then we will hear from our presenter this evening, Dr. Ingram. I've heard him present before, him facilitate before, so we are in for a treat and a true blessing. We've had his information about where he serves, but for those that may be joining us virtually, I know he serves with Great Lakes Bay Health Center. He has earned degrees and credentials to be able to speak to us. He also has a deep care for serving the community. So again, I'm grateful that he is here. He agreed to come speak with us. We are in for a blessing, and I encourage you, as I pray, to prepare yourself to be blessed, to be challenged, such that we can be better with and for each other, with our own mental health, but then also be able to share what we hear tonight and otherwise, so that we can be better in our private lives, and our familial lives with mental health. Join me in the word of prayer, and then we will hear from Dr. Ingram. Let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for keeping us since the last time we've been together, bringing us here, and we ask you to bless anyone who may be on their way now to this, and also bless those joining us in the virtual space. We thank you that we have all of these opportunities, such that your word can go forth and the principles of your word can go forth, because you care about our souls, our bodies, and our minds. You know what we have experienced, what we've seen, and what we've heard in relation to mental health. We ask that you not only bring that to our remembrance, but allow us to hear how we can be better sons and daughters of yours with our mental health. But as always, you don't just share things with us for us. You want us to be a blessing to other people. So we ask that what we hear and experience tonight allows us to be equipped to be a blessing to other people when it comes to mental health. And as you do so, we'll give you all the glory, honor, and praise. We thank you for Dr. Ingram, who you're going to share with us through. And we ask that you continue to bless him as he serves this community in all the ways that he does, all of the organizations he does, and his own church family. Father, open our hearts, minds, and souls to hear from you, such that you can be glorified, we can be edified, and we can be a part of edifying others. It is in your Son, Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. Second Baptist and our community, let's welcome Dr. Ingram.
Thank you, Pastor, for that. Thank you, Pastor, for that warm greeting. I want this to be informal, but unfortunately, in medicine, we like slides, okay? So I have to kind of balance it out. I said, well, you don't want to do like, 100 slides and everybody's eyes kind of glaze over and, what's on television tonight. On the other hand, you don't want to do no slides at all, because what it does is it kind of loses the focus. So I pared these down. So I got about 30 slides, 35 slides overall. At any time, if you have a specific question, please don't hesitate to ask at this point. It is very manageable for us with it. And I really want to spend the rest of the time really for question and answers at this point. So I've broken this down into demographics, disparities, and we're going to talk about physical disparities, mental health disparities, and more important, resilience and what can we do. Now, why do I spend time with resilience? resilience is something that people have to encourage and develop because, unfortunately, there's always going to be adversaries in life at this point then. And it's never our goal as to tell someone at this time is that, listen, there'll never be any rough patches, so everything should be smooth. We can't promise our children that. We know it's not going to happen with them. So we have to talk about when resilience is that when things come up, and COVID-19 is something that's come up at this point, is that we have to talk about how can we be resilient, overcome this, because we don't know what the next step is, and unfortunately, COVID has not decided it's over, what is done with us. So you may decide that you're done with that, but that's not really how the disease works at this point. So we're going to talk about resilience factor we can always use for every situation. Now, I like kind of demographics because it kind of put us in the same page with it. And from this slide over time is U.S. population, African Americans about 13.4%, and about 16%, a little bit over that, have issues with mental health problems. That's about 7 million people, the combination of Houston, Texas, and Philadelphia combined. So these are kind of large numbers at this point then. And the reason why I kind of like this slide is that it kind of reminds us this is something that's not so uncommon. Unfortunately, what we sometimes see is we think that, oh, no, this is so rare, we don't have to worry about it. The odds are low, it's never going to happen to me, never going to happen to my family members. And odds are not low at this point. It's just something we typically deal with many of us and our family members and our friends at this time. So it's something you're going to typically see. When I'm working with new doctors, sometimes you reach these new doctors and, they kind of say, well, I have to have the psych rotation. But I'm really going into plastic surgery. So once I'm done, I'm never going to see these patients again. And I have to remind them, there's no form of medicine you're going to go into. We don't deal with patients with mental health problems with it at this point then. Now, you can decide you're going to ignore it. You can decide it's not going to exist at that point, but they're still there at this point then. So I'm trying to prepare them for dealing with our patients because we see them everywhere. Doesn't matter what specialty is. Doesn't matter what area you're going to. They're our patients everywhere because they're part of us. They're part of the community. So it does not go away. These are large numbers at this point that we have to talk about dealing with. So I like this slide because what this shows is that really, if you look at the demographics, a large number of African Americans still live in the South. Now, when we talk about health disparities, what we also remind is that these gray, I'm sorry about the print at this time, but these gray areas are states that don't have basically Medicare buy-in. So when the Obama administration came out with Obamacare, you had the option of buying in the states. And what we see is basically is that a large number of states never bought into this. So what that means is that there's an opportunity to improve health care that wasn't taken advantage of for various reasons at this point then. And some people say, well, you know what, I heard, kind of doctors were against this. And I say, well, there's always going to be some people who are outliers who say, oh, they're against it. But I think most physicians will tell you at this point is that the more health care we have, the better. Because what happened is that patients without health care don't say, I'm just going to stay home and die. If they have a problem, they go to the emergency department. And the emergency department is the wrong place to get primary care. It's much more expensive at that point then. More mistakes are made at this point then. And in many cases, the goal of emergency care is to stabilize and get out the door. So they're not really interested in any lifestyle change about getting your blood sugar down. They're not interested in any lifestyle change about hypertension. They want to lower your blood pressure down, get you out the door. Now, that may get you out the door, but if you don't do anything long-term to manage your diabetes and your hypertension, you're going to be back there at that point then. So disparities often happen because you don't have access to care at this point then. And we have to talk about this being realistic because this is not something that's going to go away. And when we talk about it a little bit later, this is something that we see impacted by COVID-19. So, unfortunately, I'm sorry, again, we're far away with it, but this is saying hypertension, diabetes, and stroke. If you look at basically the red line is African Americans, blue line is the European Americans, is that it's much more common in African Americans at this point, across the board, all ages at this point. And it's interesting enough as you talk about strokes, a risk of strokes even at age 16 and 17-year-olds at this point. So we're at higher risk at this point then. Also, in addition to being higher risk, we see that the death rate is higher, basically from age 16 and 17 all the way up to age 50, 60. So we have a higher incident of the problem at this point. Then we have a high death rate that goes along with it. Now, this is the same because this is saying, well, you know what, maybe you guys are just at increased risk of diabetes at this point then. This next slide is showing something different. So actually, black females have a lower incidence of breast cancer, 124.3% versus 128.1%. Lower incidence of breast cancer, but they have a lower survival rate at this time. So even in cases in which you have a lower incidence of health problems with it, we're not surviving at the time, or we're not surviving. So 80% versus 91% death rate at that point then. So things are going on with us. Even things we expect to be lower, we're not seeing the numbers we expected. So a formal slide about mental health is that you kind of got to squeeze these down. So this, I'm kind of squeezing everything in here, but I like this slide over here because it says, mental health is a state of successful performance of mental functioning resulting in productive activities, fulfilling relationship with other people, and the ability to adapt to change and to cope with adversity. Adapt and adversity. Adversity is something we're going to deal with all of our lives with it, okay? You're going to deal with when they're young, and deal with you're old, you deal with your middle age, inside your career, outside your career, there's always going to be some type of adversity at this point then. Now, I love the adversity may be that, I have to get up and decide what type of coffee I might drink this morning. It doesn't happen to me at this point, but that may be a sense of adversity at this point then. But it's never going to be a point that we simply say at this time is that, you know what, everything is just fine. Okay, I don't have to deal with that. Bobby was asking about my children at this point then. So my oldest son is 40. We feel this is an adversity for us because we can't marry this man off at this point then. So I'm not saying God has promised us grandchildren, but you kind of think at 40 years old, if he's not married, not having kids, maybe we ought to start praying more for the other 3 at this point then. So that's a sense of adversity. Now, he would say that we put too much pressure on him. I'm not going to say that, but I do ask, okay? And my wife said, you should quit asking what's wrong with him. I said, you're right. I shouldn't ask him that. I should say, have you found the right person yet? But again, we all have a sense of adversity in our lives. Now, what is mental illness? Mental illness is a term that refers collectively to all diagnoses of mental illness, mental disorders, or health conditions that are characterized by alterations in thinking, mood, behavior, or some combination thereof associated with distress and impaired functioning. So mental health is that we're adjusting, okay? My son not being married is an adjustment for at this point then, at this time with him. Now, if I allowed this to interfere with functioning, if all of a sudden I was arguing with my son more, he didn't want to come around anymore, he stopped borrowing money from us at this point then, other things can develop at that point then. So it's not what the response to diversity is, it's always what our response with it happens with mental illness. Now, this slide is just kind of reminding us is that African Americans are not higher incident of mental illness. So you look at it compared to European Americans, about the same. So African Americans about 18.6%, Europeans 19.3%, Hispanic 16.3%, Asian Americans 13.9%, and American Indians are about 28.3%. So the numbers are comparable at this point then. So the actual incidence is close, not the same. Now some things are higher than others at this point then. Interesting enough, African Americans have a lower incidence of alcoholism and substance abuse in general. But they have a higher incidence of consequences and complications of that. Recidivism at this point in, hospitalization associated with the need for care at this. So even though our numbers are lower, that we actually have more health outcomes are related to it at this point in, but the numbers are comparable overall. What's going on? Part of the issue is that we are just not able to get access for treatment for various reasons. So if you look at these raw numbers at this point, I'm sorry again about this being so far away, is that basically saying for any illness, 4 million people, almost 70% of them don't have access to treatment. This is 42%, 91% don't have access to substance abuse treatment, and only about 69%, only 69.5% don't have access to treatment for depression. So what happened is that even though we have higher incidence of the comparable issues of these illnesses, we don't have the same access to care. Now, why is that? There are many reasons at this point then. And I would never simply say there's just one factor going along with it, but we're going to talk about other factors that go along with it. So first of all, mental illness, stress have impact on our body. And if anyone simply tells you at this point is, oh, worrying is no big deal, quit worrying. Well, if I could just stop worrying, I'd stop worrying. It's not an issue simply you can stop at this point then. But worry, depression, and stress have impact on our heart, lungs, stomach. Everything's affected by that. In fact, there are studies showing us that people under increased stress actually heal slower, wound care slower at that point then. And people under increased stress have a harder time getting their blood pressure under control at this point then. So it's not just physiologic. Give them a blood pressure medication and the blood pressure goes down. If we don't deal with these underlying stresses, that things go up again at this point. Forces of this disparities. Racism in our country has impact, discrimination, poverty, and also violence. So these are all stressors. Anything that increases our stress level puts us at increased risk. Now, I have some folks simply say, well, you know what? America is just a violent place. everybody should just have a gun and everything will be fine at that time. And I said, well, we've had a period of time where everybody just had a gun. That didn't solve all our problems, trust me, at this point then. There are multiple stresses going on. The stress about food insecurity is a stress. No, we are one of the wealthiest, as some people say the wealthiest companies in the world, but we're the wealthiest company in the world. But to have it where people have to worry about having enough food to eat. The number of food banks have gone up actually during COVID-19 at this point, and even with the stimulus package at this point, with the number of food banks. So things are going on at this point then. Racism is a real issue at this point then. We'll talk a little bit more about the stress, but it adds to stress. Now, as some people say, it don't bother me, if they say something I don't like at this point then. But what happens is that this kind of low level of stress adds to other issues that are going on. So I never forget a patient says that, you know what? Just if I go into the store and they start following me, I'm not stealing, but the whole idea someone is following you out adds a stress for me at that point. And now some people say, well, just don't go to that store. Well, if that's the only supermarket you got in town, okay, and you got to eat, okay, and you're probably not going to grow your food in Michigan in the wintertime, you don't have a lot of choices at this point, but that's a sense of stress at this point. So it's not simply a matter of saying, well, listen, I'm not going to do this at this point then. Discrimination in general, okay, at this time. So to feel that you have applied for a job and is it really going to be based on my character or other factors going on is a sense of stress. So there are lots of stresses out there. What are the sources? Now, this is something that someone would say we're not going to cover everything with them, but we have some historical factors going on. Slavery and sharecropping has an impact on us. Now, I have some person say, well, you know what, my goodness, that's more than 150 years ago. Why aren't you guys kind of over this at this point then? And I say, well, you have trauma that's reflected even today. I have a daughter who moved out to Seattle, so we've been reading up on Seattle history at this point then. But many states in the West, when the U.S. bought the land or stole the land, depending on who you want to listen to, at this point is they wanted to get population out there. Now, if you could go out to Seattle, Washington State is part of Oregon Territory at that time then, put a claim on land, live there for 5 years, you had free land. African Americans are not part of that at this point. And now, that does not mean that everybody went out there and succeeded. But if you never had a chance to participate, you never got that opportunity to win at that point. And you talk about those issues this time, then you didn't have that opportunity. Race-based inclusion of healthcare. This is a factor that I have to kind of remind my doctors, because some of my younger doctors don't believe that they don't believe this. They say, well, I'm not biased, I see everybody the same. And I said, well, you tell me that, but the numbers speak differently at this point then. For example, there are actually studies that shows that African Americans get less pain treatment, no matter what the age was. There's a wonderful study coming out of Atlanta saying even children that came in the hospital with broken bones, they diagnosed a broken bone, got less pain medication at this point then. So facts is going on. Now, I do feel there's some other things that are going on. When you talk about racism in medicine at this point, is there's sometimes a perception is that African Americans are tough. They don't feel pain the same at that point then. And what you see is that you could be in childbirth and they say, well, your pain is not that bad at this point then. But again, this whole issue about that's going on. So less pain medication, get less treatment at this point then. There's a wonderful book, Damon Tweedy is his name, Black Man in White Coat. He's actually a psychiatrist. And he describes his experience of going in, he injured his leg. Doctor kind of looked at him and said, oh, well, just put some ice on it. And he said, well, wait a minute, I heard some snap, a lot of swelling. He said, x-ray is normally warranted at this point then. But he, as a physician himself, had to talk to ER doctors to give the x-ray. Now, the x-ray is one of the cheapest tools that we have right now, okay? So trust me, they make a lot of money on it, but just x-rays with it. But this whole idea about injuries not being an issue, about the disparities that come up. Now, what this does is, if you're under stress, you have less socioeconomic ability, you live in poverty, homelessness, incarceration. All of these things lead to increased stress at this point. Other disparities. Over the years, this kind of adds up. There's a wealth gap between African Americans at this point then. Actually, an interesting point is that even for physicians, there's a wealth gap. African American physicians are much more likely to come out of school with much more debt at this point then. Negative stereotypes at this point contributes to it at this point then. And historically, these things kind of add up why, in many cases, we feel that our interests are not being looked at. So we have to be advocates for ourselves. Now, I just remind folks is that in my lifetime, we're not going to see a big increase in African-American physicians. If you really look at the numbers, the number of African-American male physicians has actually gone down population-wise, just not getting any males into the profession at this time. African-American females are going up. But even since the 1940s, the incident of the percent of African American physicians is really about the same. More women than men at this point. But numbers have not really changed at this point. It's really have an issue that's going to be ongoing then. Now, we have distrust. This is characterized by multiple disparities in healthcare again with it. And this feeds into COVID-19. So in the middle of this crisis that has affected the whole world, I never forget when they were talking about in Africa, and they were talking about Ebola. Africa's a poor country. And you would see these people who were working with Ebola patients, and they had to reuse their gloves, reuse their mask. And I said, oh, my goodness, what is wrong? I mean, they should be able to get these people masks. And to have, in this country right here, in the middle of the COVID crisis at this point, is that nurses saying that, listen, we have to reuse our masks. Are the masks safe? And no one knew at first. Don't trust me, they didn't know at this time. But the idea was they were safe. What they'll do is they said, well, listen, we're going to treat the mask with UV light, and we'll kill off all the type of viruses at that point. We didn't know if it was going to work or not, but that's what they did at this point then. But even in this country right now, it simply said we have to reuse masks, we have to reuse gowns at this point, and we didn't have enough supplies at this time with it. So again, disparities happen at this point then. So how does it impact Black and African and Latino communities at this point then? So first of all, what COVID has done is it's basically amplified the problem that was going on before. So we had some problems with disparity way before COVID at this point then. So we saw was that they made things worse, particularly in poor communities at this point then. Now, again, I apologize about the size of it, but what this is basically saying is that you're looking at these states, and they didn't do every state, but they have Michigan here, that's why I pulled it out. So Michigan, African Americans, about 14% of the population. We're about 33% of COVID cases and about 41% of the deaths. So why is this at this point then? Why is it that we're just getting the cases more at this point and dying more at this point then? Other facts with it. Where do you work at this point? Do you have access to care? Can you isolate yourself at this time? If you have a job in which you have to go to work, it really is kind of upsetting because I really don't feel our workers in the grocery store got the credit they want. Things were bad, but if you couldn't go to the store and buy food, we would really have a crisis on that time. So they are true heroes at that point to keep the stores open with them. And have them be treated rudely, or have someone simply saying, well, I'm not going to wear a mask when they want to wear a mask, is not fair, and they did not really understand really how implement important part of our staying alive, staying healthy at this point is be able to buy food at this point. If you could not buy food, what would happen? The military have to come and give us food, so this whole thing only kept running because we kept the grocery stores open and stocked. Truck drivers, okay. So to have them being treated disrespect is not being fair. Now, again, I apologize about the size with it, but what this is basically saying with COVID-19, what you saw is a disparity in death. So if you're African American, you have 1.1% chance of being diagnosed with COVID above your population. From there, you have a 2.5% of being hospitalized and twice the common rate of deaths with it. So disparities are ongoing with it. So that's why it's so important that we do any type of outreach we can when we talk about COVID. Now, I know there's a lot of information out there, and I know a lot of people simply say at this point is, one person said, I made it all up. And I said, well, the people who died don't think it was made up. Okay, so, they didn't have this option saying it was made up with it. But I always want to kind of spend this time to talk to them because I really remind them at this time is that this epidemic may go to the next stage. And after epidemic, it's called an endemic. And an endemic means is that we never get rid of it. So when we're talking about people saying, oh, I don't take the vaccine, I say, okay, that's you. But do you understand if we don't get rid of this, that your children born are not going to be getting the vaccine when they're born at this time, at this point then. So this younger generation of children are going to be at this increased risk at this point because we're never going to get rid of it. We're not more aggressive at this point then. So that means that everyone is going to be born is going to have to deal with it at this time, so it's not going to go away with it. So we have to encourage folks out there to get the vaccine because this is most likely not going away. And when it becomes endemic, the resources won't be there. Now, I have people decline the shot now. I said, well, what's going to happen when they charge you for the shot? Okay. It's not going to last forever that you're going to get this free. If it becomes an endemic, I say, well, it's up to you. It's out there. It's up to you. Your insurance have to pay for it at that point. And so we simply can't basically waste this opportunity to be much more aggressive with it. And we have to remember is that Delta variant is only one. There's 5 or 6 other variants out there. We don't know what they're going to do at this point in. And then I love to simply say, oh, this is all under control. Whatever out there, the variants, we know we're going to deal with it. We don't know what's going to happen at this time. 18 months ago, the Delta variant was so small, we wouldn't even think about it at this point. In fact, 18 months ago, the Delta variant wouldn't even show up on reports. The incident was that low. Right now, it's the most common variant out there. So again, with Michigan. So all these things going on. Disparities in healthcare that's been going on at this point then. We're dealing with COVID at this time. What can we do? So when we talk about coping strategies, prevention, treatment, and supportive, what I'm going to start with. So prevention. Now, we all have a genetic load. We can't do anything like that. I wish my genetic load was that I could run fast. When you see those graceful running, doing the marathon at this point, then, oh, they look so graceful and fast. I'm not a fast runner. In fact, I did a race one time, and my wife called me up. So the fast people finished up like an hour and a half, 2 hours ahead of me. So my wife, I'm 5 miles out. My wife called me up and says, well, where are you at? And I said, I'm 5 miles away. She said, well, you got to be kidding. All the old men have finished already at this point then. So I don't have the genetics to run fast. I'm doing the best I can. But if you're 5 miles behind someone, you're not going to say, I'm going to just double my speed to get caught up with them. You're just going to be 5 miles behind at this point then. So we can't do anything about our genetics, but be aware of it and take precautions with it. I have a substance abuse history in my family. I tell my children, I say, listen, you need to be concerned about this because our genes don't go the right way for this at this point then. So we have to be aware of the genetic factors. We can't do a lot about them, but we should be aware of them. Environmental factors. Even during time of COVID, there are stresses that are going on. We can have some impact with them. So I remind our mothers about this time about prenatal stress. This is the one time I want our moms to be taken care of at this point then. It is enough that they're burdened with childbirth, but their stress is conveyed to the baby at that point then. The new issue at this time is that substance abuse with it. I've had moms that struggle with substance abuse for years, and I say, well, listen, this is the one time we got to have you stop drinking. There's study after study saying even low amounts of alcohol can impact the baby. And the last thing we want to do is have a baby have additional disability from your alcohol impact for the rest of their lives with them. So that's something we can talk about, mitigating the stress associated with that with them. Eating right and exercising with it. Unfortunately, we come from a society where, in many cases, if they don't get a pill, they feel they've been cheated. And I have to remind some of my patients and peers to say, listen, everything does not require a pill, okay? Depression can be helped with exercise at this point then. Exercise more. And I don't say you got to get out there and swim 20 miles at that point then. There's actually a study showing us that if you turn off the television an hour and a half, people lost 2 to 3 pounds a month. Now, they didn't tell them to get up and exercise, but this whole idea, if you just turn off the television and do another activity, we're going to lose weight at this point. And so I talked to them about, listen, what are you doing to exercise? And I also have to lead by example, because what will typically happen if they don't think you're doing anything, it's hard to follow instructions with it. I say, well, how are you exercising? What are you doing in the summertime? What are you doing in the wintertime? Because that should be part of it. And it's a great stress reliever at this time with them. And it's not the intensity, just the whole idea of being active, walking around, standing around. I have folks say, well, listen, my legs are bothering us, I can't walk. I say, you know what? When pro athletes get hurt, they don't stop training. If they break their leg, they train the upper body at this point. So if you can't use your legs, what can we do with your arms with them? Because any activity that gets your heart rate up, using your arms or your legs, you get a cardiac benefit of it at that point. You don't have to go out and walk. You don't have to go out and swim, but any activity at that point. Lessen the substance abuse issues. Unfortunately, this is a wrong coping technique, and I understand. What's happened is that in many cases, pain is viewed as so difficult. People say, well, listen, I'm having a hard time with them, but I know if I do X, Y, and Z, the pain goes away for a while. And I have to remind them, I said, that may be true, but what happens afterwards at this point? And so I have to tell them at this point is that, listen, this is not a positive coping technique for you telling me you went out and you got high at that point. Then it has a consequence. It has an impact on your family, impact on your financial situation, an impact on your health at this point. Then, so I talk about positive coping things and certainly cutting back on the substance abuse at this point. Treatment. I like this slide because this is saying what can we do. So first of all, we know each other well. My wife knows me. If I don't get up in the morning at a certain time, something's wrong. What is wrong with you if you don't get up at a certain time with them? So if she doesn't do a thing, I ask her about this time. My children do certain things all the time, but if there's a change in the behavior, someone should bring that up is, are you okay if you see a change? If someone goes to church all the time, don't show up, Ask them, where are you? We missed you at this time. What happened at this point? Because a change in behavior means something is going on. And it may be nothing. But if we don't take care of each other and look out for each other, no one else is going to do this at this point then. Getting help when a problem is fine. I think sometimes we're just reluctant to do that. And I think there's, of course, a stigma associated with this point then, maybe other health priorities at this point then. But you can get help from inside your community, okay? You can help from your pastor. You can help from your friends at the time. But the issue is that if you have an opportunity to reach out and tell someone something is going on, because they may know something you don't know at this time with them, but you have to acknowledge if you need help. Medication is only one part of this at this time then. So I would never tell anyone that everybody got to be on medication at this point. That we don't simply have enough mental health professionals to do that anyway at this point then. But I talk about these other options, but there's a place. Psychotherapy is very important. Now, why do I mention that? I have some people say, you know what? I just talk to my friend and all my problems go away. That's okay. If that is working for you, great at this point then. But if it's not working for you, just don't simply say, well, they're not helping me at this time, I'm going to stop there. Get the help that you need at this time. And therapy can be very effective at this point, and it's not a medication. There's actually studies showing that therapy, comparing therapy and medication, you see the same type of change in the brain from therapy at that point. So it's very effective with it. Make the most of your treatment. If you're going into treatment and you don't think you get anywhere at this point, then talk to them about, listen, I'm investing into this. I'm coming to see you. I'm not getting better. What should we be doing differently? Because it should be your provider's responsibility too. And I have no hesitation saying is that if you guys are not on the same page, say, can I see someone else? You owe them nothing. In fact, if they're a good clinician, they will be happy to say, okay, listen, I think I've done the best I can with you. Let me try to find you someone else who will work with. They should never hesitate to be offended by it. Or some say, well, I don't want them to be mad. I said, this is you. Them being mad is not your problem at this point. You want to get well at this time, so get the help that you feel at this point then. Other support. A budge being judgmental. Sometimes this can be hard. I deal with a lot of substance abuse, patients with substance abuse, and when you deal with new doctors at this point, then they sometimes can be hard on folks to say, well, my goodness, we just detoxed them last week. They're back in the hospital again. And I said, well, you have to understand, this is not about you, okay, number one, okay. And they may be doing the best they can at this point. You don't know all the factors going on with it. Don't be judgmental. People need help. Try to get them the help at this time without being judgmental. Talk about what they find helpful. If working out, exercise makes you helpful, just say something about it at this point then. Encourage to discuss with the mental health provider what's going on with you. So if you don't feel you get anywhere, talk about it at that point then. I don't think there's one provider out there, again, wouldn't say, if you're not doing well, let's get you some additional help. Ask for permission. I've had folks simply say, listen, they're not telling you the whole story. I said, well, you know what? If they're not telling me the whole story, ask for permission to talk to me at this point then, because I only know what they tell me. And if other things are going on this time, I need to know about it. And most times, they'll be honest and upfront about it. And sometimes, to be honest with you, I think most of our providers should always be looking for ancillary information. So it's not enough to simply say, well, listen, you're on a diet. I say, well, get the spouse in. What's the spouse in? The spouse say, oh, my goodness, they eat ice cream and eclairs every night. You're not doing well with your diet if you eat ice cream and eclairs every night at this point. But ask about it. You can get additional information at this point then. Now, our last part is building resilience. We have been resilient in this country. I've had some people say, listen, every American should be on their own. I said, well, you know, you may think that we're all lone wolves. That's simply not true. When there's a crisis, we all want to pull together at this point then. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, we don't have everybody pulling together at this point then. But how do we build resilience? So first of all, I like these slides because this talks about what the step is. Now, these steps can be anywhere from old to young. Some people say, you know, once we kind of get set in our ways, you're not going to learn. I said, that's not true. Everyone can learn in the right circumstances with them. So first of all, I'll talk about how do we build confidence. People have to try things and develop skills to build confidence at this point then. So I hate to use sports metaphors in America at this point, but LeBron did not wake up one morning and just show up and say, I'm going to shoot some basket, get on the team. Okay? So what happens is he started somewhere down here at the bottom. He had developed skills and become a master with it. Now, there's a lot of failure with it that goes along with it, but you have to give them a chance to earn skills at this point, and that comes from doing at that point. And they may not be doing as well as you do. So I remind my sons at that point is that you don't cut the grass the way I cut the grass. The lines don't look right. I don't think your heart is in it. It don't sound like you've got a soul for it at this point then. But the only way to master the skills, you got to give more time to cut the grass at that point then. So they have to develop these type of skills. No matter what people do, we have to give them an opportunity to fail and develop the skills with them. And to basically show they can do things at this time. So this is not an empty promise. This is not saying, whoa, you did good, you're never going to improve. This is simply saying, I'm going to give you an opportunity to get better at something at this point and be confident. And they'll see the difference then. From the confidence, when we talk about being confident, we want to be confident people. So if you know you can do something, we need to reinforce that. You've done such a good job at this time. We know you can do it because we have to hear positive things. The world is full of negative comments at this point. We need to hear positive things about, we know you can do it. You've done this in the past. We want to have people that are connected. Now, why is this important? This is important because people do better when they're together with it. And the connection be from people, school, religious organization, it brings us out the best when we do things with it. So it should not be this sense that simply saying, I'm out here by myself, doesn't really matter with it. I want you to be connected because they can help you and you can help them. We want to talk about character at this point then. And character is really something that I sometimes feel that I've seen parents simply say, well, you know what, I'm just going to let my kids figure it out on their own. I said, are you kidding? You're going to let them get run over by a car to figure out they shouldn't go in the street at this point then? So we need to tell them clearly there's a right and a wrong. Okay, now they may disagree. They may say, well, your wrong is mine, but it should be a clear idea that we have expectations about character, right or wrong at this point. This is a good way and a bad way to do it at this point. So children have to be taught of this issue about character to develop. It's not something that's just going to just come out to know at this point then. Contribution. If children and people are feeling that I'm participating in the community with them, you're giving something back with them. Now, if something changes and they need help, it's not a sense of shame or guilt. It's that I've given, but if I need help, I should be able to get that help without any type of shame because they may go on to the other side. So we have to talk about encouraging that. Coping strategies. Coping strategies. Sorry, I'm still got ahead of myself. Coping strategies. There are many ways to kind of cope with adversities out there at this point then. But we want to focus on the positive thing. If your coping strategy simply says, I'm going to get home and beat my dog, that's probably not the best coping strategy. If your coping strategy says, I'm going to get out and walk, I'm going to talk to my friends, I'm going to come to church more at this point, that's a positive coping strategy. We need to talk about developing that at this point. Control. Control is not simply saying that, listen, you're going to be having everything 100 right, but this issue about is that I am responsible, okay? I can control my own self at this point then. So I am not something that have to be wait from external sources to make me control with it. It is a shame when someone simply say that the only control is when I'm in jail. Okay, we failed. If the only time you think you're going to be in control in jail, we failed. Control comes from internally at this point then. Martin Luther King, all forms of inequality and injustice, but the most shocking is of all the forms of inequality and injustice in health, the most shocking and inhumane. Healthcare injustice is something that's going on now. We have to do our best. Now, these last slides are just basically some resources in the area, and I'll kind of leave the slide deck open. So what I tried to do is kind of give us where we stood right now. And again, no one's going to tell us at this point is that everything is fine. We should all be on the same. We have disparities right now, and probably going to have disparities in the near future at this point then. But it's not hopeless. We have coping strategy. We have survived this long. We will continue to survive. But we want to survive in a healthy fashion. With this healthy fashion, we want to make sure that we do always work on developing and reinforcing positive coping skills. So I believe I'm at 35 minutes, 7 seconds, just like I told you. All right. So what I want to do is open the floor up to the first question. I'm not sure how much time I got. How much time do I have? 6? Okay. 10 minutes? Okay. All right. So we'll open up to the first question then. Yes, ma'am. Mm. Yes. Now, there's disparities in African Americans and schizophrenia. So the incidence is not higher or lower than the majority population with it. But African American men are typically diagnosed with schizophrenia more than bipolar disorder. So let me give you a classic example. If this is a case report, so they came in and said uh, the patient presents with confused agitation, bizarre haircut, talking to himself. We feel he has schizophrenia, and they focused on the bizarre haircut. And I said, well, what's bizarre about his haircut? He said, well, it's kind of stringy hair, and it had kind of different colors with it. I said, what do you mean stringy hair? And what he was describing was dreads. I said, dreads cost a lot of money. Well, you get shit. Man, listen, this is a conscious choice. Someone has said, I'm going to invest some money in dreads at this point. This is not the type of thing listen, that's someone who spent a lot of time and money to a grooming at that point then. Now, they focus on the presentation and his dress, and they say, well, this has to be schizophrenia. Now, with bipolar disorder, you can be upset and agitated. You can talk to yourself at that point then, but it has a much better prognosis with them. So what we see sometimes is that we see more African-American men being diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder when it really is bipolar disorder, a much better prognosis with it. So I always ask my counterparts to say, you have to look at exactly what the presentation is, but the diagnosis is based on historical information with it. Schizophrenia, by definition, you should have symptoms of a thought disorder for 6 months. Bipolar disorder, you can have a thought disorder just for a couple of weeks at that point then. So you do see more African Americans being diagnosed with that, but that's a disparity with it. And one of my issues at this point is I have to always ask it when that comes up is that what were the factors with it? Another example, if you're using substances and you're showing signs of a thought disorder, that's not schizophrenia. In fact, you can't make the diagnosis of substance. You have to wait for that being over with it at this time. So African American males don't use substances more often. They actually use less with it. What African Americans do is they use substances in public places would get them in trouble at this point then. European American males smoke more marijuana, use more drugs. They do it at home. We do it in the neighborhood, out in the street. So you get more problem with that point, but the incident is about the same. It's just we get diagnosed more. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Next question. Now, I do have, how much time we got? I don't want to go over my welcome. I never invite you back if you go over your welcome, okay? I do have, I've got about 9 minutes. So what I typically do is if there's kind of a lull, and I give my 1 minute of silence at this point, nobody responds, is that I typically would just kind of ask the audience about one particular concern. And what I typically ask is that with everything going on with COVID-19, with our numbers fluctuating back and forth, what do they think is the greatest challenge from a mental health standpoint with COVID-19 going on? Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think with COVID-19 and social isolation is that we have simply not been able to really quantify this as we should. So let me give you an example. I had a cousin that died during COVID-19. Now, I have a type of family who they never go to family reunions. Okay, we got people living 5 miles from each other, and we only see them at funerals at this point. So funerals are a big deal at our prime with it. In fact, I have to remind my cousins that don't take pictures at a funeral. Come to the family reunion and take pictures at this point then. So funerals are really big in my family at this point then. So we had this funeral where only 5 people could be in the room at this point then. So so this community involvement where we all come together and, we're going to meet together for the next family reunion at this point then was all gone with it. So what happened is we've become much more isolated with it. With COVID-19, when you're isolating yourself at this point, then that means you don't have involvement with friends and family at this time then. Church, there was a time in which my congregation, they weren't meeting at all. We all did it virtually at this point, which I actually think is a place for it. I don't think everybody should be virtual the whole time at this point, but this whole idea about this more sense of isolation with it. And then what happened is that with the issue with COVID-19, you couldn't follow through on the normal things with it. So you had fake folks, I had a cousin got married, and they would say, well, should we do it? Should we do it? And they just decided, well, we're just going to do it. We're just going to go to the courthouse with it. But weddings are big events for us at this point then. So again, instead of this whole gathering together and wishing the best for their wedding at this point, then everybody sent in gifts, sent in cards at the time. So what happens is that the isolation is going to have an impact for us for long term with them. How's it been affected with it? You see, with COVID-19 is the number of pets have gone up. People are missing things in their lives with them. And what happens is you replace it with other things with it. You can't get together, you can't go out, and you have pets. The number of pets are going up at this point then. Now, I was a dog, we had a dog family growing up, but, I tell my kids that our dogs are real dogs. They only came outside, if it was like 5 degrees outside. Other time, they always outside barking at this point then. Now, my daughter has a dog that sleeps in the bed with her. So, I don't even know this experience at this point then. In fact, we went to a restaurant, and she won't go to a restaurant if they don't let her take her dog with her at this point then. So, this dog has become I'm a grandpa dog now. The grandpa the dog at this point, apparently at this point then. But again, the sense of loneliness at this point then. So now I have our Christmas picture is the dog. Nina's in there in the picture with the rest of the family at this point then, okay? So it has to have an impact with it, and we really have to reach out. So what I just remind folks is that if you don't see anyone around, reach out. What's going on with them? My best friend, I know him since second grade, got COVID, and he lived. I'm going to go through the bad ending with him. But I didn't know it. You know what? I found out on Facebook. He was doing some presentation on Facebook, and I said, oh, my goodness. He's 100 miles away, had COVID. He didn't reach out to me at this point then, and I find it on Facebook because we're not connecting like we used to at this time with him. So I do think that's going to have the greatest impact with it. But we can mitigate that by reaching out. So if you don't see anyone now, reach out to them. And I have to do a better example because there's no excuse in the world for me not to, in 18 months, not to have reached out to him. Now, he didn't reach out to me either. It's both ways, but that's my fault. But in 18 months, not to him to reach out once where we were that close at this point then. So, again, we have to just do a better job of reaching out and simply saying, how can we lessen the isolation with them? And then I do think social media can help us at this point then. Now, I'm not saying everybody got to get on Facebook and these other things because some people don't believe in that. But believe it or not, the mail still works. If you don't believe in social media, send a card. You do not know how powerful cards have been at this point then, at this time then. You can still call the phone at this point then. So, again, we can reach out to lessen this issue about kind of social isolation and loneliness. But, we got to do a better job of taking care of it. It should not be this issue that we get so wrapped up to this and we don't reach out with them. And it's truly an embarrassment for one of my close friends to find out that he had COVID March of last year on Facebook. It's embarrassing. I mean, I've known him. He's the best man in my wedding at this point then. And to find that out, simply saying we got to do a better job. So we're reaching out to him, and I apologize. I said, listen, let's get together because, obviously something is not working if that we're not reaching out at all during this time. All right. I do want to thank you for this opportunity, as always, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's just so good to get out. What happens is that, you got a full load of patients. You got all this administrative work to do at this time. It's just kind of just get out and good to talk. I also like to have an open topic. Sometimes people want a specific thing kind of do, and you kind of miss it. I really thank you for this opportunity. And please, at any opportunity, just call back. If you didn't like me, I'll find somebody else, okay? It doesn't have to be me, okay? Okay. We got a lot of proposals who could actually do an excellent job, too. All right. Okay.